Olá, boa noite a todos. Good evening, everyone. Hoje, mais uma noite do webinar e vamos só dar aqui um compasso de espera a quem vai entrando para começarmos todos juntos neste que será o nosso último webinar desta edição 2024. E agora sim, sem mais demoras, boa noite uma vez mais a todos os nossos participantes. Obrigada pela vossa presença nesta noite. Vai ser uma noite muito especial, são todas, na verdade, nesta nossa edição, mas queremos deixar desde já um grande agradecimento à vossa presença e também à presença dos nossos patrocinadores que estiveram e colaboraram connosco nesta edição 2024, e são eles a Ibernat, S4Med, a EUBAG e o Girassol. Hoje teremos como patrocinador oficial a EUBAG a patrocinar este webinar de Susan Turner. Susan, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome again. Good evening for you too.
I'm very pleased to be with you.
For us, it's an honor to have your presence with us tonight. And I will present you for all, okay? Por isso, só aqui um compasso. Só um minuto. Para podermos aqui apresentar a nossa palestrante e todo o seu percurso, ou pelo menos os marcos mais importantes. Em primeiro lugar, também apresentar o tema que a Susan nos traz hoje, e o tema são alguns temas em comuns da filosofia osteopática de John Martin Littlejohn e William Sutherland, e passo então a apresentar aqui o percurso da nossa palestrante desta noite. Susan, desde que se licenciou na Escola Europeia de Osteopatia em 1979, tem exercido a sua atividade como médica osteopata na zona oeste de Londres. Ensinou osteopatia na área craniana na European School of Osteopathy em Londres, de 1980 a 2000, onde também cofundou e dirigiu a clínica infantil entre 1989 e 2000. Foi membro da equipa original do Osteopathic Center for Children em Londres, em 1991, onde trabalhou durante 4 anos. Teve como sua mentora alguém muito importante, que foi Anne Wales, também foi ela aluna de William Sutherland, e continua o seu legado. Desde 1986 tem lecionado em curso de pós-graduação de osteopatia pediátrica e craniana no Reino Unido e a nível internacional. Tem desempenhado um papel ativo no desenvolvimento do Sutherland Cranial College of Osteopathy desde a sua criação, e é também apaixonado pela osteopatia, e em gratidão à generosidade dos seus professores e dos seus mentores, tem o compromisso sincero de partilhar e transmitir a osteopatia. So, Susan, I think that's it, all in Portuguese. I'm sorry about it, but I don't know if you want to share more points or something about you.
No, I'm sure that you've more than introduced me. Thank you.
Okay, so now we can start with you. If you want, you can share with us your presentation. Yes.
Now that doesn't look quite right.
You can press the green one.
I did press the green one, and I've got something else coming up now. There we go. I press the green one again.
Yes, and you will find your presentation probably.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Good. Yes.
Okay. Good.
Good.
And it tells me I'm screen sharing now, so I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. We are seeing everything.
Okay. Well,
The
thank you
PowerPoint.
so much for introducing me and for inviting me to talk to you. I don't have answers. I have questions and ponderings and possibilities to share. And I'd be interested in all of your thoughts at the end, if I can keep to time. I'm just going to get my clock so I keep to time. So I am very interested, particularly in thinking about the philosophies of John Martin Littlejohn and William Sutherland, because it seems to me that of the source from Dr. Andrew Taylor Still, they represent the two most influential streams that have come out and formed osteopathy. And I feel that to understand the principles by which they worked is very important for us not to get lost in a reductionist model in the modern world. To me, they are not so different as people think. Dr. Still said that osteopathy is not defined by technique. It is philosophy. It is a philosophy. And if we look at the technical approaches of Sutherland and Littlejohn, for sure they're different. But actually, the place from which they worked in their concept is remarkably the same for me. And that the differences are to be appreciated too, because there are differences. And I was very grateful, really, for life led me to the European School of Osteopathy when John Wernham was teaching, very much a presence. And for those 4 years, we were kind of immersed in Littlejohn's teachings and appreciated it greatly. And then a little bit later, I became very interested in Sutherland's work, and I was introduced to his very close student, Anne Wales, who was a close friend and as well as a student of Sutherland. And of the other students of Sutherland said about her was that she was a real historian. That you could really rely on what she said that Sutherland had taught, because she was very precise about not elaborating it, but saying it as he said it. And I couldn't understand why all we were getting was Sutherland's cranial approach. I thought there must be more, and I'd seen her do treatments that were fascinated me because I couldn't understand how she got those results. And so I asked her if she could send one of her students and her study group over to teach us the body approach of WG Sutherland. And she said, I could do, but why don't you come over with a video recorder? It'll take me 5 days to unload. And so I did, with a small group of friends, of colleagues. And that was the first of many such meetings. And at that time, she was 91. And I think there must be something about osteopathy, because if we look at the lifespan of these wonderful people, Dr. Still lived to 89, Sutherland lived to 81, Dr. Littlejohn lived to 82, John Wernham lived to very, very nearly 100, and Anne Wales to 101. So I think if you work with the vital force or the breath of life, whichever you call it, perhaps it works with you. So thinking back about the thoughts of our osteopathic ancestors, We think of Harrison Fryette, we tend to think of first-degree lesion, second-degree lesion, and a very precise way of analysing structure. But actually, he was very deep in a philosophical sense, as I believe many of the Southern Stills students were at that time. Osteopathy is as simple as the human organism, and that is as simple as the universe. For in the human organism are embraced the physical, mental, and spiritual laws of the universe. To perfectly understand the human organism, then, it's necessary to possess an infinite mind. So there's clearly, in the vision of our early ancestors, of which I include Dr. Littlejohn, Dr. Sutherland, a much larger view than is generally understood, perhaps, in most of the profession now. And Carl McConnell, he was, I understand, on the faculty of the Chicago College where Dr. Littlejohn was principal. And I'm interested in what he says about life, because one of the key principles of osteopathy, behind all its manifestation in technical procedures, is the sense of the fundamental importance of the life principle, that it's the life principle we're engaging with when we treat. It's the life principle that we seek to manifest and express itself in its full potential for each person. So what does he say about life? He says, in clinical practice, it is helpful to hold the view that the life principle is not created, for it is of an eternal nature. The osteopathic art, in reality, plumbs the very depths of existence. And then we come to Dr. Still. What did he say about life? Well, he said many things, but one of the things he said is life is a substance that fills the space of the whole universe. And then he says man, his or man's existence in form is the effect of life. The cause antedates him in mind and deed. His life or spirit must be the cause of his form. So we're seeing a theme emerging here of a sense of being embedded in an alive universe, embedded in a field of life, of which our physical being is an expression. I'm also interested that Dr. Sutherland trained between 1898 and 1900, which coincided with the time when Dr. Littlejohn was teaching physiology. And Dr. Littlejohn acknowledged that the brain had motility, but he did not acknowledge the mobility of the bone, mobility of the cranial bones in any sense, even in micromotion. And I'm going to come back to that. But I think that David Fuller, in his book on osteopathy in Swedenborg, which is a wonderful study, in his words, all three, Still, Littlejohn, and Sutherland, all acknowledged an animating fluid force that must flow unimpeded from the brain to the nervous system and the rest of the body for good health to be maintained. And of course, this echoes what Swedenborg had said 200 years before. An animating fluid force that must flow unimpeded from the brain to the nervous system and the rest of the body for good health to be maintained. The brain was very important to each of them. And John Wernham said three memorable things that I can remember most from my training with him. The first one, which I love, is, "It never fails to delight me when I feel the vital force returning to the tissues under my fingers." What does that say? That says that as we work, as he works, he's engaging with the vital force. He's drawing it forth, and that the end point of any procedure is when he feels that vital force returning, expressing itself fully in the tissues. That inherent, innate motion, that inherent, innate life, that inherent, innate rhythm. And the second thing that I remember in particular was give back the body's lost rhythm to itself. To me, the lost rhythm, that implies that there is an innate rhythm, an innate and natural rhythm for each person that expresses their resonance with their life, their health, and that is what we seek to re-establish, that there is an inherent rhythm there. We're not giving rhythm to the body, we're reminding the body and evoking it, what it knows of its true rhythm, which expresses the rhythm of life. And the third saying, which I am going back to a little later, is when you treat a serious illness, in fact, he said cancer, but I know that one can't say things like that these days, so I've taken a little poetic license. You have to engage behind, with that which has not yet come into being. Man's existence in form is the effect of life, Still said. His life or spirit must be the cause of his form. So to me, that says that he was appealing to that which lies behind, that from which the life in the living body arises from. And because I feel that I sense that John Wernham was Littlejohn's closest pupil and very loyal to him, very true to him, I'm happy to accept that he was a representative of what Dr. Littlejohn was trying to teach. And one thing that comes very strongly across from Littlejohn's work is that life and rhythm are fundamental to each other, as they are actually to Sutherland. In fact, rhythm is crucial to both of them, more than it was crucial to Still. Still didn't mention rhythm as much as either Littlejohn or Sutherland. And these wonderful words, the structure pulsates with the rhythm of life. Structure pulsates with the rhythm of life. That says joy to me. That says that the body in health expresses joy through its health, through its rhythm. And so what did Littlejohn mean by vital force? It was generated from the union of spirit and matter in the bioplasm of the motile brain. It was generated from something behind, something fundamental behind the physical expression that united in the brain with the physical, with the clay, to become life. And that it flows in a vibratile and rhythmic fashion through the fluid forces of the body. That it permeates and vivifies the nervous system, the viscera, the growth structures, and all tissues. And its qualities are innately organizing, intelligent, trophic, nourishing, and it forms the basis of life. And accessibility of the vital force to the tissues depends on free articular mobility. Now, this is interesting to me because in the mind of many people, osteopathy is about correcting the joints. Yes, it is. Harmonizing the joints, making them work properly. But actually, is it something more? Is it that in order for the vital force to be able to flow, to be able to express itself, to be able to nourish and form and organize every part of the body, every cell, every tissue. The articular system needs to be free to enable that flow to happen. So it turns around really what the aim of osteopathy might be. That articular mobility is not always an end purely in itself. It is a means by which the vital force can express itself fully. And I would say that Sutherland would agree with everything in those statements. And what Littlejohn called the vital force, Sutherland called the breath of life. He said he really wanted his students to sense what that breath of life is, sense its quality within themselves and within the patient. And he said, study the animate body as well as the cadaver. Study the life principle and come closer to understanding what I mean by the breath of life. Dr. Still did his best to introduce us to this phenomenon, but we were not ready for it. What is the difference between life and not life? What is the difference between a lump of clay and a living body? If we could do that little subtraction equation, we'd sense what that quality of life is. And sometimes, in order to become more familiar with what the life principle is, it's lovely just to feel it in oneself. What is this thing I call life in my body? When I ask that question, I feel light, I feel warmth, I feel motion, I feel something akin to joy in it. And Sutherland said, in order to sense the breath of life, to be still and know, be still and listen, you are getting back to cause with a capital C. The breath of life is the fundamental principle in the science of osteopathy. And in saying you're getting back to cause, he was not only meaning with that capital C about the origin that in past time, the past time cause, like an injury, etc. Not only that, he was talking about a cause behind existence, something that breathes into existence. And he said, there's something in the cerebrospinal fluid. Littlejohn also was very interested in the cerebrospinal fluid and its importance, as was Dr. Still. Dr. Still, in his vision, referred to it as the highest known element in the human body. Now I want you to see this highest known element going out into that transmutation from the nerve cells along the fibers, along the terminal, a transmutation. Something is changed, carrying the highest known element, the breath of life, as the highest known element. That transmutation and that distribution of life through the nerves is also common to Littlejohn. Now, I come back to what I mentioned earlier, that Littlejohn saw the brain as having rhythmic motion, but he did not acknowledge that the cranium itself, in its sutures, expressed motion. And so you can imagine a young William Sutherland having been told perhaps that the brain had motion in his physiology lectures, but that the skull did not have movement. And going along a corridor and seeing a mounted disarticulated skull, which used to be called a Beauchene skull, he was caught really by great surprise, because he saw the temporal bones, and he said to himself in shock, those are beveled like the gills of a fish. They must be designed for some kind of respiratory motion. And in writing about it later, he said, how crazy can a fellow's thinking get? But the thought would not go away. And I think, I hope you can see on the slides how the temporal bone here overlaps the sphenoid in its upper part, but is overlapped by the sphenoid greater wing in the lower part, enabling, as Sutherland later concluded, the temporal squama to flare on this kind of primary inhalation and move medially on the primary exhalation, like the gills of a fish. The thought would not go away, even though he thought he must be crazy to think such a thing. And that became an inspiration for his journey that he began to develop more after 1920, 20 years after he had finished his osteopathic training. Now, Sutherland's view of cranial motion or brain motion, or what he later called the primary respiratory mechanism, this breathing type motion, rhythmic motion in the brain that was different from the motion of the breathing of the lungs, was more fundamental. He saw the ventricles of the brain as moving, in a sense, like the lateral ventricles as moving like the wings of a bird, laterally and then folding on exhalation, and the third ventricle in the middle, lifting and widening on primary exhalation and receding on primary exhalation, in concert with the fluctuation of the cerebrospinal fluid. Whereas Littlejohn actually had the view that the rhythmic motion of the brain, which itself he felt fluctuated the cerebrospinal fluid, had its origin in the vascular system and the pulmonary respiration. Those two motions together created the impulse for the motility of the brain. Well, I think it's interesting that in the 18th century and in the early 19th century, the Traub-Herring-Meyer wave was observed, which is a longer wave, a longer frequency wave of the heart rhythm that underlies it. It's a rhythmic impulse that underlies the rhythm of the heart. And what's in 2002, an article was published stating that research had been done with laser Dopplermetry by Sergey Nelson and Glonek, observing that the cranial rhythmic impulse of which Sutherland spoke was synchronous with the Traub-Herring-Meyer wave, this longer, slower frequency behind the lub-dub of the heart. And we have it here on the upper right corner. These longer waves underlying this lub-dub of the heart. So to me, I find that both, you can't ignore really either hypothesis, but I wonder if they are both in themselves an expression of a whole body manifestation within the bioelectrical field, a pulsation of the whole body bioelectrical field itself. Now in 2024, this year, early this year, there was Zhangji and I don't know why I put 2014 there. I meant 2024. Zhangji and a group of other scientists found that the brain itself, it had a neuronal pulsation, that the neuronal rhythmic there was a rhythmic movement in the brain that was essential for brain clearance, that was generated by the neurons themselves and also fluctuated the cerebrospinal fluid. So I find putting those three things together very interesting. We can observe phenomena. We don't know often what underlies them or what model, but we can look at different models and see what they have in common. So what did Littlejohn and Sutherland have in common? Well, they saw the brain in its motion as key to the transmutation of spiritual substance into the ignition of life in the body. That the vital force was produced by the union of spirit and matter. They both emphasized the importance of inherent rhythmic motion to life and health. And as I mentioned earlier, Swedenborg had said this much earlier, but still himself didn't emphasize rhythm nearly as much as they did. They both saw the fluid element as essential to the distribution of living forces to every organ and tissue. And Littlejohn, of course, emphasized vasomotion and visceromotion as vital to distribution of vital force, whereas Sutherland would not deny this, but saw the cerebrospinal fluid and its invisible element as underpinning this function. So who were the influential thinkers in the 19th century? Because these were people of their time. And the 19th century is actually very fertile in its discoveries, in its thought. It was a very productive time. Well, I think you'll find a lot in common with Still's, Littlejohn's and Sutherland's thoughts. That remember Still talking about the rule of the artery. Littlejohn, the more importance of vasomotion. That Virchow spoke of the quality and quantity of blood being essential to the health of the vital organs. That Henley stated that nerve fibers control the muscles in the vascular walls, enabling them to dilate and contract. And this is when he was the first one to name I don't know if he named it, but the vasomotor system was named in 1840. And the sense of the nervous system influencing vasomotion pervades Littlejohn's thinking very, very strongly. And Claude Bernard, also, you'll recognize his thoughts in osteopathic thinking as well, that he saw all vital systems preserving the constant conditions of life. He wrote something called the milieu intérieur, in which was later in the next century, this was all 19th century, the 20th century, middle 20th century came the idea of homeostasis. But from this, Bernard and his contemporaries came the idea that the body is a self-correcting, self-healing, self-regulating organism, which is very much the foundation of osteopathy. So the science that was around at that time that osteopathy was being born was very fertile, but the people who discovered it didn't use it for healing. The brilliance of Still and his early students Littlejohn, Sutherland, and others, was that it was used for healing. And then we had Charles Darwin speaking about evolution and the interrelationship of form and function. That's very osteopathic too. But Still's favorite biologist was Alfred Russel Wallace, who had an evolutionary theory which overlapped very much with Darwin's and was evolved completely independently of him. But the difference was that Alfred Russel Wallace saw evolution as being drawn forth by an overruling intelligence with an ultimate purpose. So instead of coming from past to future, it was as if that evolution was drawn forth rather than simply cause and effect, and it was drawn forth by the influx of the influx that was necessary, the tonal energy that was necessary for the next stage of development. And with that, there were interesting philosophical influences in that 19th century, particularly in America, that were inspired by the Swedenborgian paradigm of the currents of universal being continuously flowing into the natural world. Now, when I left the ESO, nobody had ever stated this, actually stated it, but it was implicit in everything that John Wernham was doing. There was this sense that health was always seeking to emerge from within if we could engage with it. And I think I can see very much that Swedenborgian paradigm of the currents of universal being flowing into the natural world with which the osteopath engages. And out of that philosophical source came Phineas Quimby, Warren Felt Evans, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Ralph Waldo Trine. And of course, our ancestors were philosophers. Littlejohn studied theology. He was clearly interested in the deeper questions, as was Sutherland. So who was this guy Swedenborg? Littlejohn, a bunch of Littlejohn's writings echo Swedenborg very much, although he didn't subscribe to Swedenborg's idea that the cranial bones had motion. Sutherland did, but Sutherland didn't actually blindly accept them. He accepted that the cranial bones moved. He tried it out on himself. He bound his head up, put himself into some very strange states, and made himself quite unwell by proving to himself, that if the sutures weren't free to move, that problems arose. But coming back to that in a little while, Swedenborg wanted to understand the relationship between soul and body. So his reason for studying nature was to better understand what lay behind as the manifestation of the creator. And he studied anatomy to understand the soul's manifestation in the body. And he sought to demonstrate the unity of science and spirit so that he could understand the interaction between body and soul, which is indeed a mystery and probably always will be to all of us. And he saw God as an infinite spirit, continually filling all things and beings in the universe, animating all life. Very osteopathic. He saw the brain as having rhythmic motion, animated by an influx, as he called it, or an inspiration of soul pouring in. He saw this influx as uniting with the cortex to produce what he called a most refined fluid, or a spirituous fluid, or a spirituous essence. And he saw this combining with the cerebrospinal fluid in the ventricles to, in his inverted commas, vivify all other fluids and tissues of the body through the blood, through the lymphatics, through the nervous system. I think we can see echoes in Sutherland's and Sutherland's and Littlejohn's view of the living body here. Swedenborg's spirituous essence, what he said about it, was more subtle and refined than any other fluid in the body and utterly beyond the ken of the senses. Not something we can sense by the ordinary senses, with a potency beyond what could be attributed to nature alone. Volatile, elastic, expansile, compressive, yielding, with the ability to flash through interstices and pores of the medullary substance. Taking its power from the soul, it imparts this fluid, which is not just liquid, but something flowing, to all other fluids, glands, and tissues of the body, while retaining its own character, and it does not mix. I have David Fuller to thank again from his book, Osteopathy in Swedenborg. And we see echoes in Swedenborg in Sutherland. Within the cerebrospinal fluid, he says, there is an invisible element that I refer to as the breath of life, an invisible element. I want you to visualize this breath of life as a fluid within this fluid, something that does not mix, something that has a potency as the thing that makes it move. Very much an echo of Swedenborg. Is it necessary to know what makes this fluid move? Visualize a potency, an intelligent potency that is more intelligent than your own human mentality. This vital force, this breath of life, animating. And as I mentioned earlier, Swedenborg saw rhythmic motion as very important, just as Littlejohn and Sutherland did. Swedenborg saw rhythmic motion or animation of the brain as essential for uniting the tri-unity of body, mind, and spirit to enable them to work in harmony. Rhythm is a very interesting thing. Entrainment happens easily. When one hears a rhythm, one wants to sing in harmony, in rhythm with it, one wants to walk in step with it or dance with it. Rhythm encourages other components to, or other levels to come into rhythm with it. And I find this interesting that for the body, mind, and spirit to be in harmony, it is through rhythm that they come into harmony. And I wonder when Littlejohn worked so much with rhythm, engaging with rhythm as John Wernham did, if actually there's a concept behind this of that rhythm actually bringing all other levels of a person's being into synchrony, into balanced harmony. And Fritjof Capra, 20th century physicist, fluctuations are crucial in the dynamics of self-organization. They are the basis of order, and in the living world, ordered structures arise from rhythmic patterns. And I think of John Wernham saying, give back the lost body's lost rhythm to itself. And once again, I echo Dr. Still's words, which I quoted earlier, about life. His man's existence in form is the effect of life. The cause antedates him in mind and deed. It antedates him. before it comes into existence in form. And John Wernham saying, when you treat a serious illness, you have to engage with what is behind. I mean, that which has not yet come into being. The influx of life, the influx of that which has no strain pattern, no lesion. It comes in constantly at every moment, pure and fresh. And Roland Becker was a very close student of Sutherland. You had a very intimate correspondence with him. And I think I find here also a correlation in this diagram that I've changed the graphics of it, but the words are the same. That you have, that he saw the breath of life, or the mysterious force, that mysterious something entering, influxing into the brain, and the pineal having something to do with that influx of that mysterious force of life into the cerebrospinal fluid, which through the other fluids, the nerve force and the arterial force, through rhythm, is transmitted to all membranous articular and ligamentous articular mechanisms of the body, organizing the endocrine system and the nervous system, and ultimately enabling a rhythmic balanced interchange between all the fluids of the body, and a rhythmic balanced interchange between the body itself in its cellular nature and the breath of life. And I think Sutherland, like Littlejohn, saw the brain as key to transmutation of life into physical substance. I'm going to skim over this because a little bit, but you can look at it later if you want on your on the PowerPoint. But because the Sutherland Swedenborg's view of the dural membranes and the bones of cerebrospinal fluid and rhythmic motion of respiration of the brain being primary to lung function is very much echoed in Sutherland's philosophy, which he, as I say, tried out on himself. Now, the psyche and the soma in the early days were very much a part of osteopathy. Charlotte Weaver treated psychiatric patients in Paris and in America with her own type of cranial approach. She finished her, I think she did her training around 1910, and she was encouraged by A.T. Still to explore the cranium. And Sutherland writes about his understanding of how the disturbance of the pelvis can be associated with postpartum illness, postpartum psychiatric illness. And the first osteopathic hospital was the Still Hildreth Memorial Sanatorium, which was one of the first osteopathic hospitals. And this Still was very, very encouraging about this, and very interested in that element of the work. And I think that probably you'll be very familiar with this, which written by a patient of Henry Lee, talking about the patient's mother who had a nervous breakdown in the First World War as a 16-year-old, being in a post office and having to decode terrible messages about the death of people's loved ones and having to tell them. And she went to this osteopath. She'd heard about this new treatment, and in the words that she described as she tried osteopathy, found it amazing, helpful. And the caring osteopath was Dr. Littlejohn, who she said had the kindest eyes. He restored my mother to full health. He even massaged her eyeballs, and she talked about other patients in the waiting room, waiting for their treatment, I imagine from shell shock in the First World War. Some of them, she told, had sleeping sickness, and she would see them restored to health and walking upright again. And so this awareness of the mental aspect of osteopathy, of well-being on all levels, was common to Littlejohn Sutherland still, and I think was part of the way of thinking in those early times. And what I love about this, because if you look at Littlejohn's picture, he looks a little bit stern, a little bit serious, but here we hear when he was engaged with patients, he had the kindest eyes. And although he said, Littlejohn said, physiology is the gateway through which this immense field of osteopathy is to be entered, when Still said osteopathy is anatomy first, last, and all the time, he also said that in calling it anatomy, he included physiology, histology, and chemistry. And this is in Philosophy of Osteopathy. So perhaps they were looking at two sides of the same coin, one emphasizing the other, but arriving perhaps very close to the same place. And this sense of the vital force being intelligent, of the body being a self-healing organism. Sutherland expressed this when he said, the unerring potency within the patient's body to heal itself has more power to bring about therapeutic change than any force you can safely bring about from outside. And this goes back to this sense of the unerring potency, goes back to when Still was a student and under the hands of Dr. Still in treating a patient. He said, Dr. Still taken my hand and allowed me to feel the lesion as it exaggerated, and then as the ligaments drew the bones back into place. He worked to find the potency at the point of balance tension between the opposing forces, ligamentous and fascial forces, that point of potency of balance tension, that neutral point through which health reorganization unfolds through the freeing of the expression of the breath of life. And I find it interesting in Freyet, this sense of the point of balance. And I think Freyet worked closely, didn't he, with Dr. Littlejohn in the Chicago College. He speaks also of the opposing elements being neutralized. We seek a point where antagonism is reduced and the accommodation between articulating surfaces remains. This is the neutral point. Perhaps the neutral point is something, whether we work with passive rhythmic articulation or we work with balanced tension around the neutral point. So we have here our ancestors. They have common roots, but they had inquiring minds. They each differ in certain ways because, taking the fundamental vision of osteopathy, they developed it according to their own reality, according to their own experience. I feel deeply grateful to all of them because they all faced opposition in different ways and had to have tremendous courage and suffered in order to bring to us today those gifts for our journey. Beautiful faces, reflecting beautiful souls. So I've included the sources at the end. I'm afraid they're not in alphabetical order. And if you, by any chance, might be interested in Sutherland's approach to the body, based on what Anne Wales taught me and my colleagues in the 1990s in her trailer home in Massachusetts, 5 days at a stretch in her 90s, staying very true to what Sutherland taught. I've been as true to her and to what was transmitted as I can, based, of course, on my interpretation and experience. So I hope you might enjoy that. Thank you. Now, I'm afraid I've only left 5 minutes for discussion, but Claudia, can we? Hello.
Yes, Susan, I'm here. Thank you one more time, Susan. This was incredible, this time with you and all of your knowledge about these philosophies, our mentors. This is a huge beginning of osteopathy, and every single day we should remember it in our clinic, in our practice. So thank you for this time. And we will start with our questions for you. Probably we don't have so much time for all, but we will try.
What should I do with my screen?
You can stop the screen share.
Okay.
Or,
Yep.
yes, perfect.
Okay.
Yes. So just to start this point, we will start with one question from our participant, João Magalhães. E o João, the question is, in your opinion, are these concepts and philosophies integrated into the new generation of osteopaths, or it is something we are losing?
Oh, good question. There are people who are hungry for that and are exploring it. But unfortunately, there seems to be very little room for it in many of the basic trainings in osteopathy. I think it's found more at a postgraduate level. But I would like the basic philosophy to be part of the undergraduate training. I think the need for evidence base is a bit of a mixed blessing. We value science and we value discoveries, and we value to a certain degree evidence-based, but not if it robs people of their own experience, their freedom to explore how they really see it, how they really want to dig deep. And if it robs people's sense of the authenticity of their own palpatory experience and the interaction with the physiology of the body, I feel we have to hold fast to what we value and share it with those who are interested, because it won't be for everybody, and it perhaps never was, because even in Still's time, he lamented that I think reductionism was setting in already, and reductionism is very much a part of our modern way of thinking.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, something to think about it, yes.
And to cherish, so that we don't lose it completely.
But we need to remember it, yes.
Yeah.
So thank you one more time for to do it with us tonight. And I think João is okay with the question. We have another one from Leonor Sagres. How do you simplify the words circulation and fluids for you?
I'm not sure I understand the question. How do I simplify the word circulation of fluids?
Yes.
What
What is the probably the meaning of this concept of circulation and fluids in the main concept?
Well, I'm still not sure I understand the question. But one of the things that Sutherland said was the purpose of an osteopathic treatment is to gain a more efficient interchange between all the fluids of the body, extracellular and intracellular. And Anne Wales would add, and that is physiology, the interchange of fluids, extracellular and intracellular. And well, circulation, we have vascular circulation, we have lymphatic circulation, we have nerve flow. All of which need to be supported by rhythmicity.
Yeah.
And they transmit life, oxygen and life. I don't know, did I understand the question?
I think it could be on this way, because I think probably what Leonor is asking about, when we heard about this concept circulation, we think about blood circulation, you know.
Yes.
And when you present this all of these philosophies and theories, we think in other point of view.
Yes, the circulation itself carries, well, in Littlejohn's approach, the blood itself carries, and in Sutherland, it carries that other something that we call life or vital force, or that's still called biogen. Yeah. And of course, the lymphatic circulation is incredibly important, but that's very interfacing with the blood circulation. But the lymphatics begin in the interstitial space between every cell. So that is incredibly important as a partner to the vascular circulation.
This could be a huge beginning for our Congress of Osteopathic, Classical Osteopathy in Portugal in October. So could be a very, very nice mode to initiate. We have one more question for you, Susan, from another participant, Joaquim. Joaquim is asking, it's lovely how you talk about your mentors, especially in Wales too. What made you fall in love with the osteopathy?
Oh, I think it was reading Hildreth's book, The Lengthening Shadow of Andrew Taylor Still, actually. But also in my training, particularly, I think it took me to my 4th year before it kind of came together for me. I don't know. It's this sense. It's the sense of surprise at what can happen under your hands, and the privilege of touch, and the trust with which patients come. They give you the gift of trust. And I suppose it is also, yes, it's that sense of an interaction with the breath of life within the body that is beautiful. And I agree with what John Wernham said about the vital force returning to the tissues. it's something of deep beauty, that quality of the expression of life in the body.
Beautiful, Susan. And thank you. Thank you for this this time, for this deeply sharing with us all your thoughts and your knowledge too. So we finished this mode of questions. Okay. Thank you one more time for your time with us, for saying yes to our association and to spend some hour with us. So thank you one more time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Wish I could see you all and say hello properly. But thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, we will share your contacts if you want, and if the participants, if they want to share some questions with you, could be okay.
What do you mean, to share my email? Or
if you want, you can.
I'd be, yes, that's okay in a way, except I don't know if I'll have time to reply if too many people write, because life does get very busy, and I don't want to, disappoint people if I don't have time to write back, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, honestly, always.
And I think that you asked me to send you the PowerPoint, didn't you?
Yes.
Do you want that,
They will receive it. Yes.
want that in PDF form? Yeah?
Okay.
PDF?
Yeah, could be.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you one more time. Vamos despedir-nos e de facto agradecer aqui mais uma vez à Susan Turner pela sua amabilidade, pela sua disponibilidade, agradecer uma vez mais também a todos os presentes, e de alguma forma agradecer também aos nossos patrocinadores que nos apoiaram nesta edição 2024. Passamos aqui um pequeno vídeo também sobre o nosso patrocinador oficial, que é a WG, e que nos deixa aqui uma pequena mensagem. Só um bocadinho. Só um minuto, só por questões aqui de tecnologia. E agora sim. Creio que não estávamos a ver. E então, agradecer então uma vez mais a presença de todos, divulgamos o nosso congresso da Osteopatia Clássica, que vai acontecer nos dias 12 e 13 de outubro de 2024. Deixarmos aqui este mote, este convite para que todos se sintam também convidados a participar, e de alguma forma agradecendo desde já a vossa presença nesta edição, e vejo-vos na próxima edição, e até lá, bem-aja a todos. Thank you, Susan, one more time.
Thank you too.
Thank you.